Now for some more details on the process. Lesson 5, Developing 2D 3D Games for the iPhone, all about design process. The basics of creating an iPhone application. With technological advancements in recent years, almost any iPhone user can design a good game that sells. However, you will need some basic information and knowledge, as developing a game will require you to code in a programming language. The rest of your game is only a matter of imagination. You will need to start out with Xcode and the Interface Builder. If Xcode is an unfamiliar concept for you, you will need to learn its IDE, as it serves as the basic programming language for any iPhone. For the viewers and controllers, the UI View class provides the view object. You will also need to concern yourself with certificates and profiles if you want your application to become officially accepted at the App Store. However, the most important part of creating an iPhone game is the concept design, so you should spend plenty of time thinking over how to design your game. Concept design. If you have a concept for a great game for the iPhone, you will need to develop it. Sit back, relax, and think about what you would like in a game of that kind. Keep in mind the touchscreen capabilities, but be aware of the limited RAM and graphics memory in the iPhone, and try to develop short levels that can be easily finished. If you are a beginner, it's best to focus on 2D games and move on to 3D later. Game elements and features. Once your brainstorming is done, you will have a basic idea for your future game and will need to focus on more specific characteristics. You will need scrolling capabilities for levels larger than the screen. However, it is best not to resort to this feature for your first game. The main character in the game must be easy to control and should have a selection of different items at the player's disposal. You will also need to work in some AI to make sure the game doesn't seem stale to the players, and a HUD for displaying various statistics. The advantages of an iPhone game over a desktop game. The passionate users of iPhones are mostly attracted to its various touchscreen features. Try to avoid overly accurate touch requirements so as not to annoy the user. As the input and output for the iPhone happens on the same surface, be sure those features aren't fighting for RAM space. Use context-sensitive features since you don't want the player to use too many movements for a simple action. Designing levels. Keep in mind the learning curve. The player will learn the game as it goes on, so you must offer gradually increasing difficulty and challenges. Let's face it, most of iPhone games are abandoned by players after a few levels. This is because the games are too simple or too hard. Start out with simple levels, but increase the challenge of each level as the player progresses through the game. Also add some variety with different usable items and puzzles. Make sure a level isn't impossible to finish, but don't make it too simple. Game design and graphics. If you want to design attractive graphics that won't use the memory of the iPhone to the max, you will need to design 32 by 32 pixel images that will tile the background. If you are planning to use levels larger than the screen, you could also design 15 by 20 tile maps. Try using binary frames to make simple maps containing secret items. Drawing the game. The iPhone limits the width and length of the screen to 1024 pixels. This is why you should draw frames carefully to avoid overloading RAM. By now, you will have 30% of the virtual memory occupied and you haven't even moved your character. Loading the game. Be sure the loading process doesn't take too long. Release game data as fast as you can and reallocate it to another process when the level is finished. Using the camera. The camera is the most important aspect for iPhone games with levels larger than the viewable area. Calculate the necessary offset and force the camera to stay with the character. Make a bounds check to be sure your character stays in view all the time. Creating animations. Your game contains the main character, items, and AI run NPCs, all of which need special animations. Physics and entities. An entity is any character in the game. Any entity must be able to move and be rendered as such. Check for collisions along an entity's movement path, as you don't want bugs such as NPCs jumping through walls. The most important part of any game is entity versus entity programming. Design a trigger area to detect collisions between entities. The plot. As any respectable game, yours will need a thrilling plot. Develop this using the brainstorming method and try to keep the player in the game using unusual plots. Sound programming. This is the final part of your developing process, as you must develop sounds only after the other aspects of the game are completely finished. Developing 3D games. Don't attempt 3D game development for the iPhone until you have at least 10 2D games under your belt. However, in the long run, the principles are mostly the same. You will have to add a third dimension to all the graphics, giving a perspective projection in every scene.